In this video, we're going to look at some complex stories, and we're going to try to answer some questions using trend lines and scatterplots. Let's begin. So in our first story, we've got several members at a gym who are asked how many minutes they worked at the gym, as well as how many calories they burned. Their answers were used to make the scatter plot to the right. So we made this scatter plot and made this trend line using the data we got. Write an equation for the trend line. So remember, the equation of a line is y equals mx plus b, where m is the slope and b is the y-intercept, which is where this line touches the y-axis. So to find the slope, we are going to use the slope formula. And to do that, we need to use 2 points in the line. So I'm going to use this point down here, which is 0, 0. It starts down there. And I'm going to follow this line and look for where it touches another corner. Oh, looks like it touches a corner here, which is at 20 and 300. That's going to be my next point. So 0, 0 and 20, 300. Now, you could have used another point if you wanted to. It crosses the corner right here at 40 and 600, and that could have been another good point. It also crosses the corner right here at 60 and 900, and you could have used any of those points for the distance formula, and you would have gotten the same slope. So our slope, our distance formula, is y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. y2 is 300, y1 is 0, x2 is 20, x1 is 0. So we should get 300 minus 0 over 20 minus 0. If we simplify the top and the bottom, 300 minus 0 is 300. 20 minus 0 is 20. And we can simplify this further. 300 over 20 is 15 over 1, or 15. So 300 divided by 20 is 15. So our slope is 15. So we still need to find our y-intercept, which is where this line touches the y-axis, and it touches at 0, 0. So our y-intercept is 0. So this is our equation. Y equals 15x, slope gets replaced by 15. Y-intercept gets replaced by 0. But we can simplify this further because we really don't have to add. We really don't have to write plus 0. So our slope should be y equals 15x. What does the x represent in the situation? Well, the x represents, if we look at our x-axis, look how it's labeled, it's the time in minutes. Well, given the context of the story, or what the story about, time in minutes of what? Well, it's about working out, so how many minutes they spent working out. So x represents the minutes worked out. What does the y represent? On the y-axis, it's labeled calories burned. So we can say that the y represents the calories burned after working out, but we can just say calories burned. Let's go to our questions now. We're going to use the equation to answer the questions below. And this is our equation. Y equals 15x. How many calories would you expect someone to burn if they spent 120 minutes at the gym? Now remember, y represents the minutes of the calories burned, and x represents the minutes worked out. So they want to know the calories burned, which is y. We don't know that. That's the mystery. That's what we're looking for. And they give us the minutes, which is the x. So y equals, and 15, I know 15, bring that down. X, we know what x is because they told us it's 120 minutes. So how many calories will they burn if they exercise for 120 minutes? We should expect them to burn around 1,800 calories. So you multiply 15 and 120 and you get 1,800. Let's look at another question. If someone has burned 1,740 calories, how many minutes would you predict they've spent at the gym? So let's go back to our equation. Now they've given us the calories burned this time. Remember, calories burned is y, so we're replacing y with calories burned. Bring down the 15. Predict how many minutes they spent at the gym. That's what we don't know, so we need to solve for x. We do that by dividing both sides by 15, because it's the inverse of multiplying. So divide by 15, divide 1740 by 15, and you get 116. And they were asking us how many minutes would it take to burn 1,740 calories, it'd take 116 minutes. We look at question 3. What is the slope of the trend line equation and what does it represent? Well, the slope of the trend line equation is 15. So the slope is 15, and what does that mean? So it's 15 calories burned per minute. So remember that slope is change in y over change in x. The y is calories burned. The x is time in minutes. So you can say people burn, specifically, 15 calories per minute. And what is the y-intercept of the trend line equation, and what does it represent? Well, the y-intercept is down here, and it's at 0, 0. And the y-intercept is 0. So what does that mean? Well, it means that at 0 minutes, 0 calories are burned. So let's look at another story. Julian made a scatter plot to show the number of band members at his school over the years. The trend line of a scatter plot had an equation of y equals 13x plus 45, where y represents the total number of band members and x represents the number of years since 1990. This is kind of a confusing one because it's not how most of us are used to looking at a graph. You're going to have to do some extra calculations. So let's go ahead and start. We're already given the equation to answer these questions, so let's write that down. How many students would you predict to be members of the band in 1997? So remember, y represents the total number of members, and x represents the number of years since 1990. Now, we don't know how many students would be in the band. That's the unknown. But we do know that they want us to find out how many members are in the band in 1997. So x, the x value, remember, represents the number of years since 1990. It's the number of years since 1990. So 1997 and 1990, how many years has it been between 1997 and 1990? Well, the difference of years is 7, because from 1990 to 1997 is 7 years. And you can figure that out with subtraction. 1997 minus 1990. All right, so we are still looking for the number of band members. Bring down the 13. The number of years since 1990 would be 7. And we're going to bring down the plus 45, which is our y-intercept. So y equals 13 times 7, which is 91, plus 45. And then we're going to simplify further. 91 plus 45 is 136. So remember, y is the total number of band members, and our x value was 7 years. So in 1997, you should expect 136 members to be in the band. Number 6, how many students would you expect to be members of the band in 2010? It's very similar to the last one, so you can go ahead and pause and try it on your own, but the equation we're using is y equals 13x plus 45 again. We need to find the number of students, and we need to, and they give us that. They want to know how many members are in 2010. So remember, x represents the number of years since 1990. How many years between 1990 and 2010? Well, it's 20 years. You subtract 2010 minus 1990, you're going to get 20. So y is our unknown. 13, our x is 20 years since 1990, and 45, we bring that down. Let's simplify by multiplying 13 and 20, which is 260. We need to add 45 to that still, and then we simplify this by adding those two together, and we get 305. Remember, y represents the total number of band members. So in 2010, we should expect the band to have 305 members. Number 7, in what year would you expect the band to have 370 members? This is different from the last two problems because they give us the number of band members, and they want us to know what year it would be. So again, we're going back to our equation. They gave us the number of band members to expect, which is 370. We need to bring down the 13. We don't know how many years since 1990, and we're going to bring down that plus 45. So to solve this, simplify, it's a two-step equation. We subtract 45 from both sides, and we end up getting, this cancels, this is 13x, 370 minus 45 is 325. To solve this, we divide both sides by 13, and we get 25. That's not our answer. It's asking us in what year you would expect to have 370 members. The year wouldn't be the year 25. That doesn't make sense. You have to remember what X means. And X represents the number of years since 1990. So it'll be 25 years since 1990. What does that mean? That means it's 1990. You're going to add 25 more years to that, which is 2015. So you should expect there to be 370 band members in the year 2015. Let's look at a different story. In 1960, about 45% of the U.S. population smoked cigarettes. The percentage of the U.S. population that smoked cigarettes over the years since 1960 is shown in the Scatterplot. So as you can see, the number of smokers starting at 1960 starts off at 45 over here, because they say so, and it steadily goes down. As you can see, the X represents the year since 1960. So this is not the year 10 and the year 20. This would be 1960 over here, starts at 1960, and this would be 10 years since 1960, which is 1970, 1980, 1990, 2000, and so on. So it's just important to know. So 10 years since 1960, 20 years, all the way up to 70 years since 1960. The Y-axis represents the percent of the U.S. population who smokes. So let's write an equation for this trend line. Remember, it's y equals mx plus b. We need to use our slope formula. So we know that in 1960, 45% of the population smoked. So if we're not sure, but just by looking, it could be 44, it could be 46. This story tells us that it is 45. So at 1960, at the point 0, the percent is 45. So 0.45 is going to be our 1 point. And our next point, if I go all the way down, our line touches this corner. So we're going to use this point, which is point 40, 20. And let's plug it into the slope formula. So y2 minus y1, it should be 20 minus 45. x2 minus x1, 40 minus 0. Let's simplify. 20 minus 45 is negative 25. 40 minus 0 is 40. And we're going to reduce, and we end up getting negative 5/8. Now, I put the negative sign in front of the fraction. You could also put it right in front of the 5. It really doesn't matter. You end up getting the same thing. So our slope is negative 5/8. We still need to find our y-intercept. Now, our y-intercept is where this line touches the y-axis, and it touches at 0.45. So our y-intercept is 45. So y equals our slope, which is negative 5/8 x, plus b, which is 45. And that's our equation. What does the x represent in this equation? Well, the x is the years since 1960, the number of years since 1960. And what does the y represent in this equation? The y, if we look at the axis, y-axis, is the percentage of the population that smokes. Let's answer some questions now using this equation. What does the slope represent in the context of this situation? The slope is negative 5/8. What this means, remember, the slope is the change in y over change in x. It's the population per year since 1960. So after each year, the population that smokes actually goes down. So it decreases by 5/8%. So the y represents the slope represents the percentage of smokers over time, and it decreases by 5/8% per year. What does the y-intercept represent in the context of the situation? In our story, the y-intercept is right here, or in our graph, our y-intercept's right there. And it means that at point 0, this is not the year 0. Remember, y represents the year since 1960. So at point 0, this is 1960. At year 0, 45% of the people smoked. So the Y-intercept represents a percentage of smokers in 1960, which happens to be 45. In what year would you expect 5% of the US population to smoke cigarettes? So remember, Y represents the population of smokers, and X represents the number of years since 1960. So what year would you expect 5% of the population to smoke? Well, they gave us the percent of the population that smokes, which is 5. We're going to bring down everything else, -5/8. X we don't know, which is in what year or how many years since 1960. And then we're going to bring down the plus 45. We simplify this by subtracting, or we need to solve this. So let's do a two-step equation. Subtract 45 from both sides. This cancels. 5 minus 45 is -40. Equals, bring down what's left over, which is -5/8 x. Now we have this fraction in front of x. We want to turn it into 1x or just plain x. So in order to cancel out this -5/8, you have to do the, well, there are lots of different ways, but let's do it this way. Let's multiply it by the reciprocal. Because if you multiply by the reciprocal, you're going to end up canceling everything out. So I need to cancel out the on whatever I multiply on one side, I do it on the other, of course. So this 5 cancels that 5. This 8 cancels that 8. Oops. And then why did I multiply by a -8/5? Well, because the negative cancels out that negative, because a negative times a negative is a positive. So you end up canceling everything out when you multiply by the reciprocal. Now we need to multiply this. -8 times -40, and then you're going to divide everything by 5. And you end up getting 64. So once everything canceled over here, you're left with x. When you multiply -8 times -40 and then divide by 5, you're going to get 64. So the question was, in what year would you expect 5% of the US population to smoke cigarettes? It's not the year 64. Remember, X represents the number of years since 1960. So it's been 64 years since 1960. So you're going to be adding 64 to that, and you get to the year 2024. So by 2024, you should expect the population to be of smokers to be 5%. In 2016, about what percentage of the US population would you expect to smoke cigarettes? So how many years, you're going to start off by finding out how many years has it been since 1960. In the year 2016, how many years has it been since 1960? Well, you subtract and you find out that it's 56 years. So now we know the X, because the number of years since 1960 is 56. Because they're asking us what percent of the population. So we don't know what percent of the population. We don't know what the Y is. So Y is -5/8, and then X is 56, and we're going to add plus 45. We're going to bring that down. Let's simplify by multiplying this first. 56 times 5 divided by 8, and it's going to end up being negative. So we end up getting -35. We're going to add 45 to we're going to add 45 to that as well, bring down that plus 45. And then -35 plus 45 to simplify is 10. Remember, Y is the percent of the population that smokes. So Y is 10, that means 10%. So in 2016, we should expect that 10% of the population smokes. Let's do one more. A scatter plot was created to show the temperature based on the altitude above sea level. The equation for the scatter plot's trend line is y equals -0.0035x plus 59, where y represents the temperature in degrees Fahrenheit, and x represents the distance above sea level in feet. Use the equation to answer the question below. So what type of association would you expect would this scatter plot demonstrate? Well, let's look at the equation. The equation of this are two things that we're comparing, are the temperature and also the altitude above sea level. So it's saying that as the y being the temperature and the x represents the distance above sea level. So as the distance above sea level goes up, it looks like our temperature is, it's going to be multiplied by a negative number. We add 59, but that negative shows us that there's a negative trend. So as the temperature goes, as the distance above sea level goes up, the temperatures should go down. So what kind of association should we expect? It should be a negative association because the slope is negative. As easy as that. So if you see a negative slope, association will be negative. If you see a positive slope, the association will be positive. So predict the temperature at 10,000 feet above sea level. We're going to use our equation, and they gave us the temperature, or they give us the distance above sea level. So the temperature is y. That's the part we don't know. So temperature equals this times the distance above sea level plus 59. So let's rewrite that. Y equals negative 0.0035 times 10,000 plus 59. We're going to multiply that together, and we get negative 35. And then we're going to bring down the plus 59. We're going to simplify by combining those two. And we get 24. Now, what does 24 mean? Y equals 24. Well, Y represents the temperature. So it's asking us to predict the temperature at 10,000 feet above sea level. Well, the temperature should be above roughly 24 degrees. They want us to predict the distance above sea level if the temperature is 35 degrees, round to the nearest tenth. So in this question, they give us the temperature. And remember, Y represents the temperature. So Y is going to be 35. X is what we don't know, so we're going to leave that as X. We're going to bring down everything else. To solve this, we need to, it's a two-step equation, we need to subtract 59, get X by itself. So we're going to start by subtracting 59 from both sides. We end up getting, that cancels. We end up getting this equaling negative 24, and then we just bring this down. Now, how do we get X by itself? Well, X is being multiplied by negative 0.0035. So instead of multiplying, we are going to do the inverse, which is divide both sides by 0.0035. Negative 0.0035. So if I divide this side by negative 0.0035, you should expect a positive answer. And that is indeed what we get. We get 6,857.1. What does this mean? Well, X represents the distance above sea level. Oh, well then, when we are 6,857.1 feet above sea level, we should expect the temperature to be 35 degrees. And that's it. So now you know how to use trend lines and trend line equations to answer questions. Good luck.